In 1988, a 17-year-old cheerleader from Millbrook High School in rural Pennsylvania vanished without a trace after the homecoming game, leaving behind only her pom-poms and a community consumed by unanswered questions. But 10 years later, when the gymnasium was scheduled for demolition, Coach Linda Carson discovered something shocking taped beneath the old wooden bleachers, a secret that would finally reveal what happened on that cold October night. The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of Millbrook High School's gymnasium on a crisp Friday afternoon in October 1998. Coach Linda Carson stood alone in the center of the polished basketball court, surrounded by decades of memories etched into every corner of the building. At 52, she had spent nearly half her life within these walls, first as a student, then as a teacher, and for the past 15 years as the head cheerleading coach. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred. Tomorrow, demolition crews would arrive to tear down the old gymnasium to make way for a modern sports complex. Tonight was her last chance to walk through the space that had shaped so many young lives, including her own. Linda's footsteps echoed as she moved toward the bleachers, her fingers trailing along the smooth wooden railings worn smooth by countless hands over the years. She paused at the section where the cheerleading squad used to gather before games, where nervous energy and excited chatter once filled the air, where Brennan had sat for the last time on October 14, 1988. The memory still haunted her. Tori, as everyone called her, had been the heart of the squad, a natural leader with an infectious smile and an unwavering dedication that inspired her teammates. She was the kind of girl who stayed after practice to help younger students with their routines, who organized car washes to fund new uniforms, who never missed a game or a practice in 3 years, until the night she simply vanished. Linda closed, her eyes remembering that October evening a decade ago. The homecoming game had been electric, with Millbrook defeating their longtime rivals in overtime. The cheerleaders had performed flawlessly, their synchronized movements and spirited chants energizing the packed gymnasium. Tori had been radiant, her auburn hair catching the gymnasium lights as she executed a perfect basket toss, her teammates catching her with practiced precision. After the game, the girls had gathered in the locker room to change out of their uniforms, their voices animated with post-game excitement. Linda remembered checking her watch. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. She had reminded the girls about the cleanup duties for the next morning and wished them all a safe drive home. That was the last time anyone saw Brennan alive. Her parents had called Linda at home around midnight, their voices tight with worry. Tori hadn't come home, and she wasn't answering her pager. By morning, when she still hadn't appeared, the Brennan family had contacted the police. A search began immediately, involving the entire community. Volunteers combed through the woods surrounding the school, checked abandoned buildings, and questioned everyone who had been at the game. But Tori had simply evaporated, as if she had never existed at all. The investigation had consumed the town for months. Police interviewed every student, every teacher, every parent who had attended the game. They examined Tori's locker, her car, which was found still parked in the school lot the next morning, and her bedroom at home. They found no signs of struggle, no threatening letters, no indication that she had been planning to run away. Brennan had been an honor roll student with college scholarships waiting, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of her. She had no enemies, no secret boyfriends her parents didn't know about, no history of risky behavior. She was, by all accounts, the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect young woman, which made her disappearance all the more inexplicable. Linda opened her eyes, returning to the present moment. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the gymnasium floor. She needed to finish her final walkthrough before the custodial staff locked up the building for the last time. She climbed the wooden steps to the top row of bleachers, her destination, the small storage area where old equipment and forgotten items had accumulated over the years. As the head coach, it was her responsibility to sort through anything that might be worth salvaging before the demolition began. The storage space was cramped and dusty, filled with boxes of old uniforms, broken equipment, and miscellaneous items that had been abandoned by students over the decades. Linda worked methodically, checking each box and setting aside anything that might have historical value for the new building. It was while reaching for a box, tucked far beneath the bottom bleacher, that her fingers encountered something unexpected, something that shouldn't have been there. Taped securely to the underside of the wooden seat was a small package, wrapped in plastic and secured with silver duct tape. The plastic had yellowed with age, and the tape had lost much of its adhesiveness, but the package remained intact. Linda's heart began to race as she carefully peeled away the tape and unwrapped the plastic. Inside was a small cassette tape in a clear case, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper covered in handwriting she recognized immediately. It was Tori's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Linda unfolded the paper and began to read the first few lines. "If someone finds this, it means something happened to me. I'm scared, and I don't know who else to trust." The words blurred as tears filled Linda's eyes. After 10 years of wondering, of sleepless nights filled with guilt and unanswered questions, she was holding proof that Tori Brennan's disappearance hadn't been random. Someone had been threatening her, someone she knew, and hidden in that cassette tape might be the voice of the person responsible for destroying so many lives on that terrible October night in 1988. Linda's hands shook as she read Tori's letter in the fading light of the gymnasium. The familiar handwriting, with its careful loops and neat margins, transported her back to 1988, when she would see these same letters on permission slips and homework assignments Tori brought to practice. The letter was dated October 13th, 1988, just one day before Tori disappeared. "If someone finds this, it means something happened to me. I'm scared, and I don't know who else to trust. For the past month, someone has been following me. At first I thought it was my imagination, but now I'm sure. They know my schedule. They know where I go after practice. They even know about my part-time job at Miller's Pharmacy." Linda paused, her heart racing. She remembered Miller's Pharmacy, a small drugstore on Main Street where Tori worked weekends to save money for college. The Brennan family had modest means, and Tori was determined to earn her own way. The letter continued. "3 weeks ago I started finding notes in my locker. They're not signed, but they say things like, 'I'm watching you,' and 'You're so beautiful when you don't know anyone's looking.' At first I thought maybe it was just some boy from school with a crush, but the notes have gotten stranger, more detailed. They describe what I wear to school, what I eat for lunch, even conversations I have with my friends." Linda felt a chill run down her spine. She had noticed that Tori seemed distracted during the weeks leading up to her disappearance, but she had attributed it to normal teenage stress. College applications, maintaining her grades, the pressure of being team captain. "Yesterday, I found a note that really scared me. It said, 'Soon we'll be together, and no one will be able to keep us apart.' I tried to tell my parents, but they think I'm being dramatic. They said it's probably just someone playing pranks. But Coach Carson, this doesn't feel like a prank. This feels dangerous." Linda's eyes filled with tears as she read her own name. Tori had thought about confiding in her, but had chosen to hide this message instead. Why hadn't she felt safe enough to come forward? The letter explained, "I wanted to talk to you after practice today, but I saw Mr. Peterson in the hallway, and something about the way he looked at me made me change my mind. I can't shake the feeling that whoever is doing this might be someone I know, someone I trust, someone who has access to the school, who knows my schedule, who could easily slip notes into my locker." Mr. Peterson. Linda remembered him well. David Peterson, the assistant principal who had worked at Millbrook High for over a decade. He was married with 2 young children, respected in the community, known for his dedication to students, but he also had master keys to the building and complete access to student lockers. "I'm going to tape this under the bleachers with a recording I made. If something happens to me, please make sure the police hear what I have to say. The person on the tape is someone everyone trusts, someone no one would ever suspect, but I know what I heard, and I know what I saw." The letter was signed simply, "Victoria Brennan, October 13th, 1988. Please don't let him hurt anyone else." Linda looked at the cassette tape with new urgency. Her hands trembled as she realized she was holding potential evidence in a decade-old missing person case. But she also felt a crushing weight of guilt. If only Tori had felt safe enough to come to her directly, maybe everything would have been different. The gymnasium had grown darker, shadows lengthening across the empty court. Linda carefully folded the letter and picked up the cassette tape, feeling its weight in her palm. Whatever was recorded on this tape had been important enough for Tori to risk her safety to preserve it. She needed to get home, find her old cassette player, and finally hear Victoria Brennan's voice after 10 years of silence. But as she stood to leave, a sound echoed through the empty building, the slam of a door followed by footsteps in the hallway. Someone else was in the school. Someone who might not want her to leave with what she had just discovered. Linda froze, clutching the letter and cassette tape against her chest. The footsteps in the hallway were deliberate, measured, not the hurried pace of a custodian making final rounds, but someone moving with purpose through the darkening school. She quickly slipped the evidence into her jacket pocket and crept toward the gymnasium entrance, staying close to the wall where shadows offered some concealment. The footsteps had stopped, but she could hear the distant creak of doors opening and closing, as if someone was systematically checking each room. Peering through the small window in the gymnasium door, Linda saw a figure moving down the main hallway with a flashlight. The beam swept methodically from side to side, illuminating lockers and classroom doors. Even in the dim light, she recognized the silhouette immediately. It was David Peterson. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the man Tori had mentioned in her letter. What was he doing here after hours, the night before demolition? The building had been officially closed for weeks, with only authorized personnel allowed inside for final inspections and equipment removal. Peterson stopped at the intersection near the gymnasium, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Linda pressed herself against the door, holding her breath as the light swept past the window where she stood hidden. After what felt like an eternity, Peterson continued down the opposite hallway toward the administrative offices. Linda waited until his footsteps faded before quietly opening the gymnasium door. She needed to get out of the building without being detected, but the main exit would require her to pass directly by the administrative wing where Peterson was searching. There was another exit, the old door near the maintenance room that led directly to the parking lot. It was rarely used and often forgotten, but Linda remembered it from her student days when she and her friends would sneak out during lunch periods. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way through the darkened corridors, using the dim emergency lighting to guide her path. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished linoleum, each sound seeming to echo through the empty building like a gunshot. As she approached the maintenance area, she heard Peterson's voice echoing from somewhere behind her. He was speaking to someone on a phone, his words muffled by distance but carrying an urgency that made her skin crawl. Need to make sure everything is cleared out before tomorrow morning. Can't afford to have anyone find. The rest of his conversation was lost as Linda reached the maintenance door. Her hands shook as she turned the old handle, praying it wouldn't creak. The door opened with only a soft whisper, and cool October air rushed in to greet her. She stepped outside into the parking lot, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp evening air. Only then did she realize she had been holding her breath for what felt like hours. Her car was parked under a streetlight 50 yards away, but crossing the open lot would make her visible to anyone looking out the windows. As she weighed her options, Linda heard the maintenance door click behind her. Peterson's flashlight beam suddenly swept across the parking lot, and she dove behind a dumpster just as the light passed over the spot where she had been standing. She crouched in the shadows, listening to Peterson's footsteps as he walked around the perimeter of the building, checking exits. After several minutes, she heard the door close again, followed by the sound of his car starting in the distance. Linda waited another 10 minutes before emerging from her hiding spot. As she walked quickly to her car, one thought consumed her mind. Peterson's presence at the school tonight couldn't be a coincidence. Not after finding Tori's letter. Not after reading those words about someone with access. Someone trusted. Someone who could slip notes into lockers. She needed to listen to that cassette tape immediately. Whatever Tori had recorded might finally provide the answers that had eluded everyone for 10 years, but it might also put Linda in the same danger that had silenced Victoria Brennan forever. Linda drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds to ensure she wasn't being followed. Her modest ranch house sat at the end of Maple Street, surrounded by oak trees that had grown tall enough to block most of the streetlight. She parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, studying the shadows between the houses before finally getting out of her car. Inside, she locked the door and drew the curtains before turning on any lights. The familiar comfort of her living room, with its overstuffed furniture and walls covered with team photos from decades of cheerleading squads, felt different tonight. Vulnerable. Linda went to her bedroom closet and pulled down a dusty cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside, beneath old yearbooks and teaching certificates, she found what she was looking for: a small portable cassette player she had used for recording practice routines in the early days of her coaching career. She tested it first with a blank tape, relieved when it hummed to life. The machine was old but functional. With trembling hands, she inserted Tori's cassette and pressed play. Static filled the room for several seconds, followed by the sound of rustling papers and a chair creaking. Then, cutting through 10 years of silence, came Victoria Brennan's voice. "It's Thursday night, October 13th, 1988. I'm recording this in my bedroom after my parents went to sleep." Tori's voice was younger than Linda remembered, but there was a maturity in her tone that spoke of fear forcing her to grow up too quickly. "I hope I never have to use this recording, but if something happens to me, people need to know the truth." Linda pressed the volume button, straining to catch every word. Tori's voice continued. 3 days ago, I stayed after school to practice my routines in the gym. I thought I was alone, but I heard voices coming from Mr. Peterson's office. The door was partially open, and I could see inside. He was with someone I couldn't see clearly, but I could hear them talking. The recording paused, and Linda could hear Tori taking a shaky breath. Mr. Peterson was saying things that made me sick. He was talking about me, about how I was almost ready and how he'd been preparing me all semester. He said I would understand soon, that it would be our special secret. The other person asked if he was sure I wouldn't tell anyone, and Mr. Peterson laughed. He said I trusted him completely, that all the girls did. Linda felt nausea rising in her throat. The implications of what Tori had overheard were horrifying. Then I heard Mr. Peterson say my name clearly, and he said, "Victoria will be the perfect choice for the cabin." They talked about taking me somewhere during homecoming weekend, when my parents would think I was at the team sleepover. They had it all planned out. The recording crackled with static as Tori moved closer to the microphone. I tried to leave quietly, but I knocked over my water bottle and it made a loud noise. The voices stopped immediately, and I heard footsteps coming toward the door. I ran to the bathroom and hid until I was sure they were gone. But when I came back, Mr. Peterson was standing in the hallway watching me. He smiled and asked if everything was okay, if I needed any help with anything. Linda could hear the terror in Tori's young voice as she continued, "He knows I heard something. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me now, and the notes in my locker started the next day. I think he's testing me, trying to see if I'll tell anyone. But who would believe me? He's been at this school forever. Everyone trusts him." The tape went quiet except for the soft hum of the machine. Linda realized she was holding her breath, waiting for more. Then Tori's voice returned, barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow is the homecoming game. If I disappear after that, it's not an accident. David Peterson and whoever was with him, they planned this. They planned to take me." The recording ended with a click, leaving Linda alone in the devastating silence. Linda sat in stunned silence as the weight of Tori's words settled over her. 10 years of wondering, of blaming herself for not seeing the signs, and now she knew the horrible truth. Victoria Brennan had tried to protect herself, had tried to leave evidence, but no one had found it in time. She rewound the tape and listened again, this time taking notes on every detail. Peterson had an accomplice, someone who had helped plan Tori's abduction. They had mentioned a cabin, which suggested they had a specific location in mind. Most disturbing of all, Peterson's comment about Tori being almost ready implied this wasn't his first time. Linda's phone rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the cassette player. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and for a moment she considered not answering. But at 10:30 p.m. it could be an emergency. "Hello?" Silence greeted her, followed by the faint sound of breathing. "Hello?" she repeated more firmly this time. "Coach Carson?" The voice was male, distorted slightly as if the caller was speaking through something to disguise his tone. "I hope you enjoyed your visit to the school tonight." Linda's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows you found something that doesn't belong to you. Something that should have stayed buried with the past." Her hand tightened on the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." A low chuckle came through the line. "The cassette tape, Linda. And the letter. You've been carrying them around in your jacket pocket since you left the gymnasium." Linda sprang to her feet, rushing to the window and peering through the curtains. The street appeared empty, but the caller's knowledge of what she had taken meant he had been watching her, had been close enough to see her conceal the evidence. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want you to forget what you found tonight. Tori Brennan was a troubled girl who ran away from home. That's what everyone believed then, and that's what they should continue to believe. Some secrets are better left buried." "She was murdered," Linda said, surprising herself with her boldness. "And you know who did it." Another silence, longer this time. When the voice returned, it carried a sharper edge. "Tori made some very poor choices. She stuck her nose where it didn't belong, and she paid the price. You're a smart woman, Linda. Don't make the same mistake she did." "Is this Peterson? Are you the one who—" The line went dead. Linda stared at the phone, her heart racing. Whoever had called knew exactly what she had discovered, which meant they had been watching the school tonight. They might still be watching her house. She turned off all the lights and moved carefully through her home, checking that every door and window was locked. In her bedroom, she retrieved a small lockbox from beneath her bed and placed the cassette tape and letter inside, along with her notes from the recording. The smart thing would be to call the police immediately. But Linda knew how these things worked in small towns. Peterson still had connections at the school district, still had friends throughout the community. Any investigation would move slowly, and he would have time to destroy evidence or disappear entirely. More importantly, Tori's recording had mentioned an accomplice. Someone else had been in that office, someone else who had helped plan whatever happened to Victoria Brennan. If Linda went to the police too quickly, that person might slip away while they focused on Peterson. She needed more information, more evidence. But first, she needed to ensure her own safety. Linda pulled her suitcase from the closet and began packing essential items. She would drive to her sister's house in Philadelphia tonight, somewhere she could think clearly and plan her next move, without looking over her shoulder. As she packed, one thought kept echoing in her mind. Tori had said Peterson mentioned this wasn't his first time, that other girls had been chosen before her. If that was true, then Victoria Brennan might not have been his only victim. And somewhere out there, a predator was still free, still dangerous, still selecting his next target. Linda drove through the night toward Philadelphia, constantly checking her mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The 3-hour journey gave her time to think, to process what she had learned, and to formulate a plan. By the time she reached her sister's suburban home at 2 a.m., she had made several crucial decisions. Sister Margaret answered the door in her robe, immediately concerned by Linda's unexpected arrival and obvious distress. Over coffee in the kitchen, Linda shared everything: the discovery of the evidence, Tori's recording, the threatening phone call. Margaret, a retired nurse with a practical nature, listened without interruption until Linda finished. "You need to go to the FBI," Margaret said firmly. "This crosses state lines if they took her somewhere else, and it sounds like there might be other victims. Local police might be compromised." Linda nodded. She had reached the same conclusion during the drive, but first she needed to do something that had been weighing on her conscience for 10 years. The next morning, Linda called Amanda Wells, Tori's best friend from high school. She had kept in touch with Amanda sporadically over the years, knowing that Tori's disappearance had deeply affected her. Amanda, now married with children of her own, lived just outside Philadelphia. They met at a quiet cafe in Chestnut Hill. Amanda, with her blonde hair now cut short and laugh lines around her eyes, looked successful and content. But when Linda mentioned Tori's name, the old pain immediately surfaced. "I've never stopped thinking about her," Amanda said, stirring sugar into her coffee with nervous movements. "Sometimes I'll see a woman with auburn hair, or I'll hear someone laugh a certain way, and for just a moment I think it might be Tori." Linda leaned forward across the small table. Amanda, I need to ask you some difficult questions about the weeks before Tori disappeared. Did she ever mention feeling uncomfortable around any teachers? Specifically, Mr. Peterson? Amanda's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Why are you asking about Mr. Peterson after all these years? I found something yesterday. Evidence that Tori left behind. She was in danger, Amanda, and she knew it. For a long moment, Amanda stared into her coffee cup. When she looked up, tears had formed in her eyes. She did mention him, Amanda said quietly. About a month before she disappeared, Tori said Mr. Peterson had been asking her to stay after school for what he called special projects, things like organizing files in his office or helping him prepare materials for parent conferences. Linda felt her stomach tighten. Did she seem uncomfortable about it? At first she was flattered. You know how Tori was. She always wanted to help everyone. But then she started making excuses to avoid staying after school. She said Mr. Peterson's made her feel weird, like he was always looking at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Amanda paused, wiping her eyes with a napkin. There was something else. About 2 weeks before homecoming, Tori asked me if I thought it was normal for a teacher to comment on a student's appearance. She said Mr. Peterson had told her she was blossoming into a beautiful young woman, and that she should be careful around boys because she was too trusting and innocent. Did you tell the police this when they interviewed you? Amanda shook her head, shame coloring her features. I was 17 and scared. Mr. Peterson was on the search committee helping coordinate the volunteers looking for Tori. He seemed so concerned, so helpful. I convinced myself that Tori had just been overthinking things, that maybe she misunderstood his intentions. Linda reached across the table and squeezed Amanda's hand. You were just a child. You couldn't have known. But if I had spoken up, Amanda's voice broke. Maybe they would have looked at him more closely. Maybe they would have found her. Linda made her decision. Amanda, I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. Will you come with me? Will you tell them what you just told me? Amanda nodded without hesitation. Yes, it's time Tori finally got justice. As they left the cafe, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in 10 years. Hope. Tori's voice from beyond the grave, combined with Amanda's testimony, might finally be enough to bring down the man who had destroyed so many lives. But she also knew that once they took this step, there would be no going back. Peterson and his accomplice would realize their secret was no longer safe. The FBI field office in Philadelphia was a sterile, imposing building that made Linda's stomach flutter with nervous energy. She and Amanda sat in a conference room with Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, but an intensity that suggested she had seen too much darkness in her career. Agent Mitchell listened carefully as Linda played Tori's recording, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking for clarification. When the tape ended, she studied both women with a penetrating gaze. This is potentially explosive evidence, Agent Mitchell said. But I need to be honest with you. A decade-old recording, while compelling, presents certain challenges. We'll need to verify its authenticity and build a broader case around it. She turned to Amanda. Your testimony about Peterson's inappropriate behavior is crucial. It establishes a pattern that supports what Victoria recorded, but I suspect there's more we need to uncover. Agent Mitchell explained that the FBI would immediately begin investigating Peterson's background, looking for any reports or complaints that might have been overlooked or suppressed. They would also examine whether he had access to property that might fit the description of the cabin mentioned in Tori's recording. What concerns me most, Agent Mitchell continued, is the accomplice Victoria mentioned. Someone else was involved in planning this, and that person is still out there. They're also the one most likely to have made the threatening call to Coach Carson. Linda felt a chill at the reminder. Do you think we're in danger? I'm recommending protective surveillance for both of you until we can assess the threat level. These people have kept this secret for 10 years. They won't give up easily now that it's been exposed. As they prepared to leave, Agent Mitchell's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression growing more serious with each moment of the conversation. That was our research team, she said after hanging up. They've found something interesting about David Peterson. 3 years after Victoria's disappearance, He left Millbrook High under circumstances that were never made public. Officially, he took early retirement for health reasons. Unofficially, there were rumors about inappropriate relationships with students. Linda and Amanda exchanged glances. "Where did he go?" Linda asked. "That's what we're trying to determine." His trail goes cold after 1991. No employment records, no forwarding address, no paper trail of any kind. It's as if David Peterson simply ceased to exist. The drive back to Margaret's house was tense, both women lost in thought about the implications of Peterson's disappearance. But as they pulled into the driveway, Linda noticed something that made her blood run cold. The front door was standing, slightly open. "Stay in the car," Linda whispered to Amanda, reaching for her phone to call 911. But before she could dial, Margaret appeared in the doorway, waving them inside with urgent gestures. They hurried into the house, where Margaret met them with a pale face and shaking hands. "Someone was here," Margaret said breathlessly. "I came home from the grocery store about an hour ago, and the back door had been forced open. Nothing was stolen, but—" She led them to the guest room where Linda had spent the night. The room had been thoroughly searched, drawers pulled out, mattress askew, even the picture frames removed from the walls. Someone had been looking for something specific. "The lockbox," Linda whispered, rushing to the closet where she had hidden it. Relief flooded through her when she found it still tucked behind the winter coats, apparently overlooked in the intruder's haste. But on the bed, arranged carefully where Linda couldn't miss it, was a newspaper clipping from 1988. The headline read, "Local cheerleader missing after homecoming game." Below it, someone had written in red ink, "Some girls never learn to keep their mouths shut." Amanda pointed to the window with a trembling finger. "Linda, look!" Carved into the wooden window frame, still fresh with wood shavings on the sill, was a message that made Linda's knees nearly buckle. "You're next." Whoever was responsible for Tori's disappearance was no longer content with phone threats. They were escalating, getting bolder, coming closer, and they had just declared war. Within 30 minutes of Linda's frantic call to Agent Mitchell, the house was swarming with FBI technicians collecting evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, photographed the carved message, and took samples of the wood shavings. Margaret packed a bag and left to stay with her daughter across town, while Linda and Amanda were relocated to a safe house under federal protection. The safe house was a modest apartment in downtown Philadelphia, sterile and anonymous. As Linda sat on the unfamiliar couch that evening, clutching Tori's lockbox, she felt the weight of 10 years pressing down on her. How many nights had Victoria's parents sat like this, wondering where their daughter was, whether she was still alive? Agent Mitchell arrived the next morning with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. "We've made some disturbing discoveries," she began, settling into the chair across from Linda and Amanda. "The investigation into Peterson's background revealed a pattern that goes back much further than we initially thought." She opened the folder and spread out several photographs. "These are school yearbooks from Peterson's previous positions. Before Millbrook High, he worked at 3 other schools over a 15-year period. At each location, there were female students who went missing or died under suspicious circumstances." Linda's breath caught as she studied the photos. Young faces, bright smiles, girls who looked heartbreakingly similar to Tori. Petite, auburn-haired, athletic. 1974, Cedar Ridge High School in Ohio, Agent Mitchell continued. "Melissa Crawford, age 16, disappeared after a school dance. Her body was never found. Peterson was a guidance counselor there." She pointed to another photo. 1978, Brookfield Academy in West Virginia. Jennifer Hawkins, 17, died in what was ruled a hiking accident. She fell from a cliff while on a school-sponsored nature trip that Peterson organized. The third photo showed a girl with Tori's same bright smile. 1983, Pine Valley High School in Maryland. Rebecca Martinez, 16, vanished during a summer camp program. Peterson was the assistant director. Amanda covered her mouth with her hand. "How many others were there?" "We're still investigating, but the pattern suggests Peterson has been hunting young women for decades. What's particularly chilling is that he seems to have had help, someone who could provide alibis, help dispose of evidence, assist with logistics." Agent Mitchell pulled out another document. We've traced Peterson's movements after he left Millbrook. He didn't just disappear, he changed his identity. David Peterson became David Paulson, then Daniel Parker, then Dennis Phillips. Each time, he found work in education or youth programs under his new name. Linda felt sick. Where is he now? That's what we're trying to determine. His last known location was a private boarding school in Vermont, but he left there 18 months ago. Since then, nothing. The agent's phone buzzed and she glanced at it with a frown. "Excuse me, I need to take this." She stepped into the kitchen to take the call, leaving Linda and Amanda alone with the horrifying photographs spread across the coffee table. Linda picked up Melissa Crawford's picture, studying the young face that would never age beyond 16. "We have to stop him," Linda whispered. "Tori tried to stop him and look what happened to her. But we have evidence now. We have a voice." Agent Mitchell returned, her face pale. "That was our field office in Vermont, the boarding school where Peterson worked. They just found the body of a 17-year-old student who was reported missing 6 months ago. Sarah Fleming. Auburn hair, small build, honor student." She sat down heavily. "The school groundskeeper discovered her remains buried in the woods behind the campus. The local medical examiner found evidence of prolonged captivity before death." Linda felt the room spinning around her. Another young life lost, another family destroyed, while Peterson continued his twisted game. "There's something else," Agent Mitchell said quietly. "We found something at the burial site, a cassette tape just like the one Victoria left. Sarah Fleming had recorded her own message before she died." The agent met Linda's eyes with devastating clarity. She mentioned being held in a cabin with another man, someone she called the teacher's friend. The same accomplice Victoria heard 10 years ago. Linda gripped Amanda's hand tightly. Peterson wasn't just still alive, he was still killing. And his partner, the unknown accomplice who had threatened. Linda, just days ago, was helping him select and dispose of new victims. Time was running out for someone else's daughter. Agent Mitchell played Sarah Fleming's recording that evening, and the similarities to Tori's tape were chilling. Sarah had discovered she was being watched, had found notes in her belongings, and had overheard conversations about a plan to take her. But there was additional information that made Linda's blood run cold. "The teacher's friend visits on weekends," Sarah's young voice whispered from the cassette. "He brings supplies and sometimes other girls. I heard them talking about someone named Victoria, about how she fought too hard and they had to end it quickly. They said they learned from that mistake and now they keep the girls longer." Linda closed her eyes, fighting waves of nausea. Tori had tried to resist, had tried to fight back, and they had killed her for it. Now they were keeping their victims alive longer, drawing out the horror. The next morning brought a breakthrough. FBI analysts working through the night had identified a connection between Peterson's various identities and property records. Under the name Dennis Phillips, he had purchased a remote cabin in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York 3 years ago. "The property is completely isolated," Agent Mitchell explained, showing Linda and Amanda satellite photos of dense forest surrounding a small structure. No neighbors for miles, no road access except a private logging trail. It's the perfect place to hold someone without being discovered. A tactical team was being assembled, but Linda could see the concern in Agent Mitchell's face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "We lost communication with our surveillance team watching the property 12 hours ago. 2 agents went in for reconnaissance and haven't reported back. We have to assume Peterson knows we found him." The implication hung heavy in the air. If Peterson felt cornered, he might eliminate any evidence, including victims who were still alive. Linda made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I want to go with you." "Absolutely not," Agent Mitchell said firmly. "This is a federal operation involving armed suspects. Civilians don't—" "He knows who I am," Linda interrupted. "He's been threatening me directly. If there are girls still alive in that cabin, they might respond better to a familiar face, someone who represents safety rather than more authority figures with guns." Amanda nodded in agreement. "Linda's right. If these girls have been held captive, they'll be terrified of everyone. Having a teacher there, someone who spent her life protecting students, could make the difference." Agent Mitchell studied Linda carefully. You understand the risks? Peterson has killed before, and he has nothing left to lose now. I understand, Linda said quietly. But Tori trusted me to find the truth. I owe it to her, and to every girl, whose voice has been silenced, to see this through to the end. 3 hours later, Linda found herself in the back of an FBI tactical van, wearing a bulletproof vest and listening to the team's final briefing. The plan was simple: surround the cabin, attempt negotiation, and extract any hostages before Peterson could harm them. But as they drove deeper into the Adirondack wilderness, Linda's phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number, and Agent Mitchell nodded for her to answer. "Hello, Linda." The voice was calm, almost friendly. "I hear you've been looking for me." It was Peterson. After 10 years of hiding, he was finally ready to talk. "Where are the girls?" Linda asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Peterson chuckled softly. "Safe? For now. But you and I need to have a conversation first. Just the two of us. No FBI, no backup, no weapons. You come to the cabin alone, and maybe we can work something out. And if I don't? Well," Peterson said, his tone turning colder, "let's just say some people might not survive to see tomorrow. You have 30 minutes to decide." The line went dead, leaving Linda with an impossible choice. The FBI van pulled to a stop at the end of the logging trail, still a quarter-mile from Peterson's cabin. Agent Mitchell spoke rapidly into her radio, coordinating with sniper teams positioned in the surrounding forest, while Linda stared through the trees at the faint outline of the structure ahead. "We can't let you go in alone," Agent Mitchell said, for the third time. "It's suicide." Linda adjusted the small microphone taped beneath her jacket. "He'll know if anyone follows me, but you'll hear everything through this wire." She had convinced them to let her try Peterson's proposed meeting, but only with extensive backup hidden in the woods. Sharpshooters were positioned with clear lines of sight to the cabin, and tactical teams waited at predetermined positions. "Remember," Agent Mitchell said, "keep him talking. The longer you can draw out the conversation, the more time we have to locate and extract any hostages." Linda nodded, checking her watch. 23 minutes had passed since Peterson's call. She began walking down the narrow dirt path, her footsteps unnaturally loud in the forest silence. The cabin appeared through the trees, a modest log structure with boarded windows and a single door. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and Linda could see a figure silhouetted in the doorway. As she approached, David Peterson stepped into the clearing. He looked older than she remembered, his hair now completely gray, and his face lined with age. But his eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had fooled an entire community for years. "Hello, Linda," he said, his voice carrying the same false warmth she remembered from parent-teacher conferences. "Thank you for coming." "Where are they?" Linda asked, stopping 10 feet from the porch. Peterson smiled. "Direct as always. They're safe inside. 2 lovely young women who remind me so much of dear Victoria. Would you like to see them?" Before Linda could respond, Peterson gestured behind him. A man emerged from the cabin's shadows. Someone Linda recognized with a shock that nearly brought her to her knees. It was Tom Bradley, the principal of Millbrook High School. The man who had led the search for Tori, who had comforted her parents, who had spoken at memorial services about the tragedy of losing such a bright young life. "Hello, Linda," Tom said, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by something cold and predatory. "I wish you hadn't been so persistent." Linda's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Tom had been Peterson's accomplice all along. He had access to student records, could manipulate investigations, could redirect suspicion away from his partner. He had been in the perfect position to help Peterson select victims and cover their tracks. "You were there that night," Linda whispered. "You helped take Tori?" Tom nodded casually. "David identified her as perfect for our needs, but I handled the logistics. It was surprisingly easy. A few chloroform-soaked rags, a van parked behind the gymnasium, and Victoria Brennan simply ceased to exist." Peterson stepped closer. "We've been perfecting our methods for decades, Linda. Tom and I met in college, bonded over certain shared interests. We realized we could help each other achieve our goals while maintaining perfectly respectable public lives. The cabin you mentioned." "In Tori's recording," Linda said, Playing for time. Was it this place? Oh no, Peterson laughed. This is a much newer acquisition. That first cabin was in Pennsylvania, much closer to school. We disposed of it years ago, along with any evidence it might have contained. Tom checked his watch. We need to move this along, David. The FBI will realize she's taking too long. Peterson nodded. You're right, of course. Linda, I'm afraid you've caused us considerable inconvenience, but you're also going to help us solve a problem. He gestured toward the cabin. Our current guests have been rather uncooperative. They keep insisting that someone will come looking for them, that people care about them. I think having a respected teacher like yourself here will help convince them otherwise. Linda's stomach dropped as she realized Peterson's true plan. He didn't intend to kill her quickly. He wanted to use her presence to break the spirits of the girls inside, to convince them that even their would-be rescuer had been captured. The FBI knows where I am, Linda said, backing away from the porch. Tom pulled a gun from his jacket. Yes, we're counting on that. When they storm the cabin, they'll find a terrible tragedy. A deranged former teacher who snapped and killed several young women before taking her own life. David and I will be devastated witnesses who barely escaped with our lives. Peterson's smile never wavered. It really is the perfect solution. You'll take the blame for decades of our work, and we'll be free to start fresh somewhere new. Linda's hand moved instinctively toward the microphone beneath her jacket, praying that Agent Mitchell was hearing every word of their confession. But as Tom raised his weapon, she realized that time had just run out. Time seemed to slow as Tom raised his weapon toward Linda. She could see his finger beginning to squeeze the trigger when the forest around them erupted in chaos. FBI, drop your weapons! Shouts came from multiple directions as tactical agents emerged from the tree line, their rifles trained on both men. Tom spun toward the nearest voice, his gun swinging away from Linda, and in that moment she dove behind a stack of firewood near the cabin's porch. Peterson held up his hands immediately, ever the calculating survivor. Officers, thank goodness you're here. This woman has been threatening us. She's clearly unstable. We heard everything, Peterson. Agent Mitchell's voice cut through his lies as she approached with her weapon drawn. The microphone picked up your entire confession. Tom's face contorted with rage and desperation. Instead of surrendering, he backed toward the cabin door, keeping his gun trained on the advancing agents. You don't understand, he shouted. We were helping these girls, giving them purpose, teaching them their place in the world. The only place you're going is federal prison, Agent Mitchell replied coldly. Now drop the weapon and step away from the cabin. Tom's response was to fire a wild shot toward the agents before disappearing inside the cabin. Linda heard screaming from within, young voices filled with terror. Peterson, still standing with his hands raised, continued his desperate performance. I had no choice. Tom threatened my family if I didn't help him. I'm as much a victim as anyone. Agent Mitchell ignored him, speaking rapidly into her radio. We need the hostage rescue team now. Suspect is barricaded inside with unknown number of victims. Linda rose from her hiding spot behind the firewood. Let me try to talk to him, she called out. He might listen to me. He knows me. Absolutely not, Agent Mitchell replied. You've done enough. But Linda was already moving toward the cabin door, driven by the sounds of fear coming from inside. She had spent her career protecting young people, and she wasn't going to stop. Now, Tom, she called out as she approached the door. Tom, it's Linda Carson. I know you're scared, but this doesn't have to end badly. Let the girls go and we can work something out. From inside came Tom's voice, higher pitched now with panic. Stay back. I'll kill them all if anyone comes closer. Tom, I've known you for 15 years, Linda continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You were a good principal, a good leader. This isn't who you really are. A bitter laugh echoed from the cabin. You never knew me at all, Linda. None of you did. Do you want to know why I really did this? Why I helped David all these years? Linda moved closer to the door, aware of the tactical team positioning themselves around the building. Tell me, Tom, help me understand. Because they were perfect. Tom's voice was barely controlled now. These beautiful, innocent girls with their whole lives ahead of them. They were everything I could never have, never touch, never possess. So we found a way. The honesty of his confession was more chilling than any threat. Linda realized she was talking to a man who had spent decades living a lie, hiding his true nature behind a mask of respectability. Tom, the girls inside, they're not objects to be possessed. They're people with families who love them, with dreams and futures, just like Tori had. Tori, Tom said, and Linda could hear something breaking in his voice. She was special. She fought us so hard that night. Even when she knew she couldn't win, she never stopped fighting. Through the crack in the door, Linda could see movement inside the cabin. Tom was visible in profile, his gun pointed toward shapes huddled in the corner. "Where is she, Tom?" Linda asked softly. "Where did you bury Tori? Her parents deserve to know." For a moment silence filled the clearing. Then Tom's voice came again, smaller now, almost childlike, under the old oak tree behind the school. "We buried her there so she could always be close to the place she loved most." Agent Mitchell's voice came through Linda's earpiece. "We have confirmation on 2 hostages, both alive, taking the shot in 3 seconds. The sniper's shot was precise and final." Tom Bradley collapsed inside the cabin, his weapon clattering harmlessly across the wooden floor. Within seconds, tactical agents stormed through the door while Linda pressed herself against the cabin's exterior wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Clear! 2 victims secured!" came the shout from inside. Linda watched as paramedics rushed into the cabin, followed moments later by the emergence of 2 young women wrapped in blankets. Both appeared to be teenagers, thin and pale from their ordeal, but alive. One of them looked remarkably like Tori, the same auburn hair, the same delicate features that had made her Peterson's target. Agent Mitchell approached Linda as Peterson was led away in handcuffs, his false facade finally cracked, revealing the hollow predator beneath. "It's over," Agent Mitchell said quietly. "We found journals inside the cabin documenting dozens of victims over the past 30 years. This goes far beyond what we imagined." Linda nodded numbly, still processing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. "The girls, will they be okay? Physically, they'll recover. Emotionally," Agent Mitchell's expression was grim. "It's going to take time. But they're survivors, just like you." 2 weeks later, Linda stood in the cemetery behind Millbrook High School, watching as investigators carefully excavated the area beneath the ancient oak tree Tom had described. The tree had been a landmark at the school for generations, a place where students gathered for pictures, where couples carved their initials, where graduation photos were taken. It seemed obscenely fitting that Tori's final resting place had been hidden in plain sight, in a location that represented hope and new beginnings. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains were those of Victoria Brennan. After 10 years of uncertainty, she was finally coming home. Linda attended Tori's funeral 3 days later. The church was packed with people who had never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someday they would have answers. Tori's parents, now in their 60s, had aged decades in the years since their daughter's disappearance, but there was a sense of peace in their faces that hadn't been there before. Amanda sat beside Linda in the front pew, both women holding hands as the pastor spoke about justice, about truth finally coming to light, about a young woman whose voice had reached across a decade to ensure her killers faced judgment. "Victoria left us a gift," the pastor said, his voice carrying throughout the packed church. "Her courage to speak the truth, even when she knew the cost, saved other lives. Her message, hidden beneath those gymnasium bleachers, became a beacon that led investigators not just to her killers, but to other victims who might never have been found." After the service, Linda walked alone to the spot where the old gymnasium had stood. The demolition had been completed weeks ago, and a new sports complex was rising in its place. But she could still picture the wooden bleachers where Tori had hidden her final testimony. As she stood there, Amanda joined her, carrying a small wrapped package. "I thought you should have this," Amanda said, handing Linda the package. Inside was a photo from their 1988 homecoming game, the last picture ever taken of Tori, mid-cheer, her face bright with joy and life. On the back, someone had written, in faded ink, "For Coach Carson, who never gave up believing in us. Love, Tori." Linda realized with a start that Tori must have intended to give her this photo after the game that night, a small token of appreciation that had instead become a final message of trust. "She knew," Linda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She knew we would find the truth," Amanda nodded, wrapping an arm around Linda's shoulders. "And now other girls will have the chance to live the life Tori never got to experience." Her voice saved them. As they walked away from the construction site, Linda carried with her the knowledge that Victoria Brennan's courage had not been in vain. 10 years after her death, Tori had finally found her voice and ensured that no other young woman would suffer the same fate in silence.